Honorable Presidents and Prime Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, friends, all protocol observed. Greetings and a very warm welcome. I'm Sabina Alkire, and I'm deeply honored to moderate this side event organized by the Republic of Chile, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and the United Nations Development Programme with the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, at the University of Oxford. Poverty is at a crossroad. As the Secretary General said, for the first time in 30 years, poverty is rising, human development indicators are declining, and we are careering off track in achieving these sustainable development goals. So creativity and resources are sorely needed, right as recession looms. But this is a crossroad because impoverishment is not inevitable. Today, we listen to true leaders in terms of their professional position and their intellectual orientation, to hear how they are working with courage and conviction to create an inflection point, to turn a corner on poverty. Finally, a tool many will discuss is the MPI, or Multidimensional Poverty Index. What is it? This poverty measure looks into the different faces of poverty: hunger, illiteracy, informal work, insecurity, landlessness, ramshackle houses, unsafe water, shocks, and so on. You start by creating a deprivation profile for one person, showing the disadvantages she or he experiences in a set of relevant indicators. The MPI identifies a person who experiences a critical mass of deprivations as poor. The MPI information platform shows what percentage of people are poor and how they are poor across these different indicators or faces of poverty. In 2020, bespoke national MPIs are reported in the global SDG database, while a comparable global MPI is estimated by UNDP and OPHI. The co-author of this methodology, Professor James Foster, joins us in the event and could elaborate the properties, its links to inequality, and even to Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index. We now open this event, and I'm delighted to turn to Sebastian Piñera, President of Chile and co-host of this event, for his address. President Piñera.
La pandemia del coronavirus y la recesión económica mundial han traído graves consecuencias sanitarias, sociales y económicas a todas las economías del mundo. Esto significa un tremendo desafío para los países, porque tenemos que entregar apoyos eficaces y oportunos a las familias más vulnerables y a las familias de clase media. El índice de pobreza multidimensional es una herramienta fundamental para poder identificar a los hogares que viven en condiciones de pobreza, y también porque las carencias que afectan a uno de los integrantes de cada familia afectan también a la familia entera. Durante la pandemia hemos visto cómo una misma familia puede enfrentar la pérdida del empleo de alguna persona adulta, la exclusión de niñas o niños o adolescentes del sistema escolar, dificultades alimentarias o situaciones de hacinamiento. Por ello es importante medir, pero no solo medir, también tenemos que actuar para enfrentar la pobreza de forma multidimensional. La falta de seguridad social es la carencia que más afecta a los hogares en pobreza. En parte o en gran parte debido a la informalidad laboral en que viven muchos de nuestros trabajadores. Para apoyar mejor a esas familias más vulnerables, que muchas veces tienen solo ingresos informales, en Chile hemos diseñado un plan de protección social, con beneficios como un ingreso familiar de emergencia, garantizado a todas las familias que lo requieren, que hoy día beneficia a más de 3 millones de hogares en nuestro país. Pero no basta con proteger a nuestros ciudadanos solamente durante los tiempos de emergencia. También debemos ser capaces de levantar la vista y buscar mecanismos que nos permitan un mecanismo de protección permanente. Por ejemplo, para permitir la reinserción de las mujeres en el mercado laboral o el aumento de los empleos formales, es absolutamente fundamental recuperar la capacidad de crecer, de invertir, de innovar, para poder crear los empleos que tanto se necesitan. El índice de pobreza multidimensional también nos ha permitido monitorear las dificultades que tienen los hogares con mayor hacinamiento para poder mantener las medidas de distanciamiento físico y social que tanto se requieren para combatir la pandemia del coronavirus y poder proteger la salud de todas las familias. Las atenciones de salud son otro aspecto fundamental. Tenemos que fortalecer nuestro sistema de salud a través de una comprensión multidimensional de la pobreza, porque así podremos observar la capacidad de respuesta de nuestro sistema de salud para entregar una atención oportuna, eficaz y para reducir las barreras de acceso que afectan a muchos grupos de nuestra población. Esto es fundamental en tiempos de pandemia, donde las atenciones en salud han disminuido considerablemente en todas las materias no relacionadas con el COVID-19. La medición de la pobreza multidimensional posibilita la elaboración de políticas públicas más focalizadas, más efectivas, más oportunas, para poder atender las carencias que experimentan las familias que lo requieren. Un diagnóstico certero y oportuno de esas carencias es absolutamente indispensable para poder enfrentar con las mejores herramientas y en los tiempos oportunos los efectos que esta emergencia sanitaria y esta recesión mundial están provocando en la vida de tantas familias que sin duda necesitan y merecen una mirada comprensiva, una ayuda eficaz y sobre todo un acompañamiento para que puedan superar esta pandemia, superar esta recesión, volver a caminar y poder recuperar sus proyectos de vida.
President Piñera powerfully shared his vision that in this era of the pandemic and global recession, the MPI is a fundamental tool to improve the efficacy and reach of policies for the poor and middle class. Yes, it is a measure, but it is a measure whose destination lies in shaping powerful, strategic, and feasible ways to accompany those whose life projects have been overwhelmed, so they stride forward again. We now turn to Imran Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, and our co-host for his reflections. Prime Minister.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, around 1 billion people, almost 15% of the world's population, survive in poverty, lacking the income and capabilities to live with dignity. Poverty imposes massive human suffering. It is the most pervasive violation of human rights. It is also the root cause of socio-economic instability and of most political and security problems across the world. It is thus only right that poverty eradication is the first among UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Excellencies, over the past 30 years, poverty had visibly declined. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered the worst global recession in over a century. 100 million people are likely to be pushed back into extreme poverty. A decade's development could be reversed. The COVID virus does not discriminate, but it is the poor and vulnerable who have suffered the most from it. In Pakistan, we have been able to control the virus through our strategy of smart lockdowns. My government has done its utmost to shield the poor and the vulnerable. Despite our financial difficulties, we implemented a $1.25 billion package to deliver emergency cash to over 15 million families, covering over 100 million people. My government is implementing a multi-sectorial poverty alleviation program, ESAS, which means compassion in Urdu. It is the largest poverty eradication program in Pakistan's history. My government is committed to reducing poverty from 24.3% to 19% by 2023. My aim is to create an Islamic welfare state based on the principles of Riyasat-e-Medina through inclusive, equitable growth and economic modernization. Excellencies, as the UN Secretary General has observed, Inequality is the hallmark of our times. Today, the 26 richest people in the world own as much wealth as half the world's population does. The richer countries have mobilized over $10 trillion to recover from the COVID crisis. The developing countries, on the other hand, are struggling to find even a small fraction of the $2.5 trillion they need. Apart from the direct attack on poverty, we need to address its systemic causes. At the national and international levels, the structures of finance, production, and trade must be made fair and equitable. The exploitation of the resources of the poor countries must stop. The illicit flows of fruits of corruption and crime must be halted, and the stolen assets returned to the countries of origin. And developing countries must be helped to recover from the COVID crisis, to realize the SDGs, and ward off the impacts of climate change. The financial resources needed by the developing countries must be mobilized through debt relief, which I called for last April, the creation of new special drawing rights, and expanded official development assistance. The realization of SDGs can be accelerated, especially through major investments in sustainable infrastructure and renewable energy, transport, housing, water, and sanitation. New technologies must be mobilized and the digital divide bridged to enable developing countries to leapfrog into a modern development paradigm. I'm confident that this important event will contribute significantly to a collective fight against global poverty and the promotion of SDGs. I thank you.
Prime Minister Imran Khan drew our attention to poverty as suffering, as a violation of rights, a spark for political instability, and COVID triggered its increase. In Pakistan, this unleashed not despair, but ihsas, compassion. Yet he argued the structures of finance, production, and technology must be made fairer, debt relief and ODA expanded, so that others participate in that work of compassion. We are now grateful to invite Ashraf Ghani, the President of Afghanistan, to give his address. President Ghani.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Excellencies, academic colleagues, it's a pleasure to be with you. The COVID-19 pandemic is a hyper event, an event so disruptive that it marks a rupture in global, local, and national history between the past and the future. It plunged our interconnected world into turmoil, uncertainty, and unprecedented risk. It exposed existing vulnerabilities and shortcomings in our systems in normal modes of contact. It wreaked havoc on lives and livelihoods, particularly for the poor and disadvantaged. It posed an unparalleled challenge to our scientific and technological capabilities, an existential threat to our medical professionals who have been on the front lines of a war for which we were not prepared. The pandemic also challenged all of us in positions of leadership around the globe to be better leaders. It forced us to rethink how we lead, to be more effective, more efficient leaders. It forced us to listen better and act quicker. All of this has been true for Afghanistan. The virus arrived in Afghanistan at the end of February in Herat province on the border with Iran. The virus peaked in June with an infection rate of 76%. As of September 23rd, we had recorded 1,446 deaths from the virus. The unofficial count could be higher. Today, with the virus on the decline, the infection rate is fluctuating daily between 6 and 25%. As a government, we moved fast, knowing that our most vulnerable would be hit hardest by the pandemic. Our focus was those living in poverty, those who would be affected worst, both from the virus and the adverse economic effects of a lockdown. A little over a month After the virus had reached our borders, I had articulated a way of moving forward in a 7-page document responding to the coronavirus. In this document, we forecasted the trajectory of the virus in 5 phases: acknowledgement, diffusion, adversity, relief, and recovery. But more important, right from the beginning, our strategy differentiated between expectations of our people as citizens, demands of the market and economy, and capabilities and resources of the government. We also looked at the most affected segments of the society, those living in poverty, and differentiated between the impact of the crisis on the structurally poor and the situationally poor. I'll come back to poverty later, but first I want to discuss the leadership challenge and our very simple approach to leadership in times of corona. We had to listen to our fellow citizens, understand the problems within their context, and then design and implement programs and measures to respond to those expectations. That was not only a technical challenge, it was also a leadership challenge. How did we approach the leadership challenge? The Office of the Presidency for any democracy is a nodal point where a people's and a nation's aspirations and frustrations interact and converge. It is a place where people look for fairness, empathy, and delivery. The presidency is also a listening post, provided the one holding office learns the art of listening and makes a discipline of systematic and appreciative inquiry and learning. This listening post became the locus of data, experiences, and expectations that informed our COVID-19 response. I've had the privilege of traveling repeatedly to all the provinces of Afghanistan. I used to average meeting 5,000 citizens a month. Since COVID, I've been to 7 provinces, and we turned consultations to an electronic listening system. It is important to understand the difference in perspective of men and women, young and old, urban, rural, and pastoral. A great characteristic of the Afghan people is our sense of equality in public interactions. People have often said to me in one way or another, we've come, we've spoken, and we expect results. If you don't act on what we've told you, we will not come back. I'm privileged that they keep coming back. They know our limitations, but they also know that we intend to deliver and do deliver. What have the Afghan people expected from their leaders during this particular crisis? They've asked us to turn what we've heard into effective programs that address the roots of their problems and produce results. From the medical overhaul to the most immediate needs. The first need was food security. For the first time in our history, urban areas were exposed, and we delivered baked bread to all our 34 provincial capitals in the city of Kabul. Agriculture productivity needed to be maintained, and trade, because we rely on value chains, needed to be enhanced. I'd like to particularly single out our Central Asian neighbors who did not impose restrictions on the flows, and consequently, food prices only increased between 5 to 10%, and we've been able to keep it going. We have one of our most ambitious programs under implementation today. We're providing, under the program of National Food Program, assistance to 4.5 million families or households that covers 90% of the population of this country. We intend to create the direct mechanisms of assistance to the poor so they would be able to make every decision within every household for themselves. The Afghan people have now returned to work, and the economy is moving forward. but our vulnerability is substantially increased. Our other problem is that we have a constant flow of refugees. This month alone, close to 80,000 of Afghans have returned from Iran. In the last 19 years, 10 million of us have returned, and in the last 5 years, 4. Counting and keeping track requires dynamic tools, and that's where the multi-poverty dimension index becomes very necessary. We reorganized our entire system of budget, reprioritized and articulated changes in existing national programs that have coverage to every citizen across and aim to have that coverage. I'd like to thank the Asian Development Bank, the European Union, the IMF and the World Bank, and our bilateral partners for their assistance. And I'd like to thank our neighbors, first and foremost, Central Asia, then Iran, then Pakistan, that initially closed its borders, but subsequently opened them, and China and others. Poverty is multidimensional. An historic problem in Afghanistan. It certainly did not start with COVID, because 40 years of conflict have produced constant poverty. To respond to the challenge, both structurally and situationally, we've identified the following priorities. First, we need to reach the poor as directly as possible. And within 18 months, we hope to have an electronic ID for every citizen of Afghanistan and create the mobile money system to be able to transfer resources directly to them. Second, we have to enhance our citizens' assets. Key to this is increasing the productivity of land, labor, and water. Third, we must align the goals of market building, state building, and nation building. Fourth, we must utilize our immense natural wealth with about 320,000 potential of renewable energy that we've started, and $1 trillion worth of mineral resources. Fifth, and most importantly, we have to make peace and continue to build peace. MPI's utility lies in both providing a solid basis for policy formation and monitoring of policy implementation. We've therefore decided that our National Statistics Information Authority should use and update it regularly. We have identified the critical ingredients of the future we want. First, citizenship as a notion where men and women are equal members of a polity in society. And second, the political framework of the Republic, where leadership is regularly renewed through the will of the people and held accountable for the mandate given to serve them. Together, we, the people of the United Nations, can and must deliver on the promise of the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you for enabling me to participate in this very important gathering.
Thank you so much, President Ghani. Often the word leader might conjure a loud, impatient, and ambitious entrepreneur. But in President Ghani's address, we encountered leadership that listens better and acts quicker to ameliorate the impact of this hyper event on the poorest. Leadership can become conscious of its own power and, using data and insights and expectations, respond aptly. We also heard how Afghanistan, who launched its MPI in 2019, is using it together with the Citizens' Charter and data in its response. Thank you so much. We now turn to Carlos Alvarado Quesada, President of Costa Rica, who hosted this side event last year. And may I please kindly remind speakers that there might be a bell. It might be a little bit quiet to remind you of your time. Thank you so much, President Alvarado.
Celebrate that even during the pandemic, when it's most pressing, we talk about the MPI because it becomes more important. MPI is something, not being very ambitious, it's something huge. It's a change of paradigm. It's a change we see and tackle poverty. That's why it's so relevant. It's ethically relevant because we are addressing to those who needs it the most. It's also linked with the objectives of sustainable development. Let me tell you how it has impacted in the reality of Costa Rica. Before 2015, that we implemented the MPI, we only used the poverty measure of income. That meant that our vision on tackling poverty was merely based on the income people receive. But with MPI, the difference is you're not attacking only what income means in the life of the poor, but you're going to the roots of the problem. You're going to measure things in terms of the household as a whole. And that shift in paradigm changes not only the vision of how you see poverty, but how you address it. One key element is how we budget in order to address poverty. If we get to see the different dimensions of how it's affecting citizens throughout the country, the difference between regions in the impacts of the multidimensional indicators, we can budget appropriately regarding of what we want to change.
But also, this provides a tool to see and to give a follow-up on the impacts of implementing the public policy, adjust budget, execution, evaluation, and see how we can tackle it again and move the needle to eradicate poverty. And that's what we've been doing for the past 5 years with the method that Sabina Alcar and James Foster had developed. And that's why they are so passionate about it. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why we all need to be passionate about it, because it's a powerful tool to eradicate poverty. This is what we're talking about today. It's a tool that adjusts to the reality of each country. It's not a suit fits all. Everyone can build their MPI regardless of what their priorities are. And it's a tool from taking the words and the principles of leaving no one behind and making reality in practice. Ever since we developed that index, we measure poverty by income and by multidimensionality, and they both coexist, and we address better our battle against poverty. Ever since we implemented the multidimensional poverty in Costa Rica has reduced in almost 5 percentile points. That means we have decreased multidimensional poverty. But at the same time, income poverty remains the same. And that gave us the insight to understand one of the key problems is in the labor market, which is, and that links directly to education and inequality in education. So those insights directly provide you with your tools to readjust quickly the public policy and to see it in a more comprehensive way and act. That's why for leaders, this is so important, for policymakers, for the academia, for the private sector, and that's why we encourage to embrace it and spread the word and keep thriving and keep working with the MPI. I want to thank all the people that helped Costa Rica in the past 5 years to make it a reality. OPHI in Oxford, Sabina, John Hammock, James Foster's, all the team, governments in Colombia that helped us at the beginning, for example, and also friends from the World Bank, the El BID in Latin America, most recently, and a great help from the UNDP program, helping with the specific systems, the digital systems, as President of Afghanistan mentioned, when you have the registration directly from the people, you can address precision policy directly to the household and change their life with whatever they need. So we in Costa Rica are very passionate about this. I've seen how it works. I've seen changing lives, changing the course of the public policy in the right direction and forcing us in a good way to keep in the good track, to keep in a good direction, to be accountable. So thank you again, Sabina, not only for inviting us to this event, which I think it's most relevant, but for keeping this brilliant flame and spreading the word, because this tool is necessary to leave no one behind. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you so very much, Carlos, for your words and for Costa Rica's skilled innovation in institutionalizing the information platform of MPI into budgeting, into policy design, targeting, and coordination across sectors and levels of government. That embodies, in our view, the reason we try to work on measurement, which is to shape action, not just in the public sector, as you said, but also in the private sector and civil society and in people's movements. We now turn to Juan Orlando Hernández, President of Honduras, under whose watch Honduras developed and launched their MPI. President Hernández.
Gracias, Sabina. Un gusto de saludarlos a todos y todas. Definitivamente que esta pandemia ha sido la peor de las tragedias humanas que el mundo ha enfrentado en los últimos tiempos. Y en el caso nuestro de Honduras, puedo decirles que nos ha impactado fuertemente en el tema social, el tema económico, y particularmente en la lucha contra la pobreza, pero no nos va a desenfocar de esta política pública que ya construimos en materia de ir midiendo multidimensionalmente la pobreza, porque es una forma mucho más comprensiva y efectiva. Casi es como trabajar con un rayo láser, focalizando, identificando, focalizando y atendiendo. Pero también quiero decirles que de inicio tuvimos que hacer un cierre del país, una cuarentena, pero teníamos que atender a las familias más necesitadas con alimentos. Atendimos a más de 1,5 millones de familias. Luego también hemos tenido que estructurar un sistema de salud que permita buscar a las familias o a las personas que están o ya con la enfermedad o con los síntomas, y eso nos ha permitido llegar a todos los municipios del país, pero al mismo tiempo creo que después de la pandemia tendremos un sistema de salud mucho más cercano, mucho más próximo al individuo, a la familia, y eso también tiene que ver con ir midiendo la pobreza multidimensionalmente. Yo quisiera también decirles que para que comprendan el impacto, en 1998 Honduras fue afectada por un tremendo huracán, el huracán Mitch. Cantidad de personas que fallecieron tristemente, una destrucción fuerte, el impacto en nuestra economía fue de un 2% del PIB. Medida esta pandemia, hasta hace un par de días, casi estamos llegando a 4 veces más el impacto de ese evento. Entonces, no es un tema menor. Por eso, para nosotros es fundamental este trabajo de cerca con Oxford, con OPHI, con Naciones Unidas. Yo agradezco a Sabina, a John Hammock y a todo el equipo, y las experiencias de otros países como Colombia. Desde el 2014 que iniciamos, nos comprometimos en esta lucha contra la pobreza. Decidimos atender a la micro y pequeña empresa, porque en Honduras ahí está el 70% de los empleos del país. De igual manera, en términos de generar una estructura de desarrollo, de inclusión, hemos construido en el país una especie de centro logístico para la región, con infraestructura, aeropuertos, corredores conectados con el resto de los países. Pero entendemos que también necesitamos cambios estructurales en cómo el sistema financiero atiende a los más necesitados y cómo también vamos habilitando a la gente más pobre a salir adelante. Obviamente no hay varitas mágicas para esto. Por eso también hemos decidido acudir a las experiencias más exitosas y en el 2015 fuimos de los primeros países en dar el paso al frente para medir la línea de pobreza a través de la Iniciativa de Pobreza y Desarrollo Humano de la Universidad de Oxford, a quienes nuevamente les agradezco. Conocer y atacar las raíces de la pobreza nos permitió reducir del 2013 al 2016 la pobreza multidimensional de 74.2 a 70.7. Es decir, alrededor de 170,000 hondureños dejaron su condición de pobre. Estos logros también fueron confirmados por el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, con otros programas que tenemos con ellos, y de igual manera, pensando en esa responsabilidad y en ese enfoque humano, sabíamos que teníamos que ser aún mucho más efectivos. Y es entonces cuando observamos a nuestra familia de pobreza multidimensional a través de parámetros de la Universidad de Oxford. Y ahí decidimos centrar en el tema de 8 grandes ejes de acción. Seguridad ciudadana, que a la fecha se ha reducido en alrededor de un 60% la tasa de homicidios. Un programa Vida Mejor, que es un tema de mucha atención a los más pobres, a los más necesitados, mejorando las condiciones de su vivienda, pero también con acceso a créditos para salir adelante. Salud para todos, la transformación del sistema de salud, que la pandemia nos permite avanzar aún más vamos a quedar con un sistema de salud mucho más comprensivo. Un programa que le llamamos Del Campo a la Mesa. Todo el corredor seco de Honduras, donde estaban la mayoría de los más pobres en el sector rural, ahora afortunadamente están produciendo 25 millones de libras mensuales de alimentos que antes no tenía el país. Y esa gente vivía antes en extrema pobreza. Luego la masificación de proyectos de vivienda nos genera mucho empleo y también mucha dignidad a la vivienda mejorada o a la vivienda nueva. También la reactivación del turismo, y eso tristemente ha tenido un efecto terrible durante la pandemia que estamos tratando de rescatar. En ese sentido, yo quisiera también decir que ya ahora, con el apoyo de UNICEF, OPHI, Banco Mundial y BID, hemos estructurado 17 indicadores. Y aquí aprovecho nuevamente para agradecer a John Hammock, que vino al país, estuvo con nosotros, y también construimos un gabinete que lo presido de manera personal, un gabinete de atención al tema de pobreza. Y ahí tenemos 17 factores para estar...
Un minuto, presidente.
No podemos seguir dando pasos en falso. Tenemos que seguir avanzando y este mecanismo de pobreza multidimensional es el más efectivo y no nos vamos a detener en esta lucha. Tenemos una enorme cantidad ahora de retos, pero vamos en la ruta correcta, esperando siempre que las experiencias de los demás países también nos sirvan a nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Presidente. President Hernández has both co-hosted and addressed this side event in the past, and I wish to congratulate him because actually this is his 5th time to speak in the UN General Assembly side event on multidimensional poverty. We are truly grateful to you for persevering year in and year out in making poverty a priority and seeking strategically to confront it. We now turn to His Excellency KP Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal, for his reflections. Prime Minister.
Heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, I commend the government of Chile, MPPN and OPHI for hosting this event. As we begin the decade of implementation of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, progress in poverty reduction should be a primary indicator of assessing our overall performance. The Constitution of Nepal enshrines several indicators of multiple poverty as fundamental rights of the citizen that include right to food, right to basic education and primary health care, right to clean water and sanitation, right to decent housing and right to social protection. The Constitution guides us to strive for establishing an egalitarian society. Our economic policies are aimed at promoting economic growth with equity and social justice. Our goal is to end all forms of discrimination, deprivation, and improve the quality of lives of our people. We are committed to ensure that no one remains hungry and no one dies of hunger. We also aim at securing human security as early as possible to end all forms of poverty in the country. We have implemented targeted programs to reducing poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, and improving delivery of essential services. Education is compulsory up to basic level and free up to secondary level. Primary health care is free for all citizens. Subsidized health insurance scheme has covered a large section of people. Insurance against COVID-19 is also in implementation. Universal access to renewable energy, basic water supply, and sanitation is being achieved soon. Safe and decent housing schemes of the government is offering better housing facilities for the poor. More than 1/3 of the people are covered by one type of social protection or the other. Income generating activities through government targeted programs, microfinance services, and interventions of cooperative and community organizations have been successful to reduce absolute poverty more than 1 percentage point every year for some years now. All these have contributed for overall reduction of poverty and improvement in human development indices. Overall, we have institutionalized our approach of looking at poverty through the prism of more than absolute income. Considering poverty as a multidimensional phenomenon, we have considered both the monetary and non-monetary aspects of poverty in our national development strategy. In partnership with OPHI, Nepal published first Multidimensional Poverty Index (MPI) in 2018. The report identified that the incidence of multidimensional poverty in Nepal has declined by half from 59% in 2006 to 29% in 2014. The two indicators, nutrition and schooling, in which we were lagging behind, have received renewed priority. Nepal will release updated second report of national MPI within this year, reflecting the status as of 2018-19. By aligning with the SDGs, we have set a target of reducing MPI to 11.5% by the end of 2024. To complement this endeavor, Nepal has undertaken series of living standards survey, multiple indicators cluster survey, and demographic health survey for monitoring both the monetary and non-monetary measures of poverty. The 12th round of the decennial population census in 2021 will add significant value in this process. Investing in people and preventing them from relapsing into poverty remains the key challenge. In devising appropriate policies, credible MPI data would provide a useful base. However, in a country of diverse geographical, social, economic, and cultural conditions like Nepal, we must generate MPI at a much disaggregated level so that resources could be judicially allocated to reduce inequality and meet our aspiration of prosperous Nepal, happy Nepali, along with eliminating all kinds of inequality. The COVID pandemic has severely impacted our effort to end absolute poverty and move to reducing all other forms of poverty as soon as possible. We have been making best efforts to protect the lives of our citizens against both the health and economic threats posed by the pandemic. I firmly believe that with sincere national endeavor and larger global development cooperation and dedicated support measures, we can overcome this pandemic, achieve economic recovery, and move to the path of speedy development. It is high time that states reorient economic priorities and reallocate resources for building and maintaining of basic social protection, healthcare, and education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. He spoke of how the national MPI of Nepal served to institutionalize their approach of looking at poverty through the prism of more than income. And he acknowledged Nepal's lightning fast progress in cutting MPI by half between 2006 and 2014, plus commitment to have credible regular data, a census map of MPI in 2021, and of reducing poverty to 11% by a given year. Regular disaggregated data enables leaders with a diversity of people and geography, like Nepal, to invest wisely, equitably, and happily. So thank you so much, Prime Minister. We now turn to Her Excellency Maria Alejandra Muñoz, Vice President of Ecuador. Her Excellency had to go on a humanitarian mission and so sent a video, and we will post the full video online after this event.
Señores jefes de Estado de Chile, Pakistán, Afganistán, Costa Rica, Honduras y Nepal, demás autoridades presentes. Reciban un cordial saludo desde la provincia ecuatoriana de Chimborazo, provincia que es una de las más afectadas por la caída de ceniza, producto de la actividad del volcán Sangay del último domingo, y que a su vez registra uno de los índices más altos de pobreza multidimensional en el país. Reflexionando sobre la temática del foro, es preciso recalcar que hablar de liderazgo en este momento es una palabra clave y necesaria. Liderazgo en lo público, en lo privado, en lo académico, en lo científico, en lo ético, en todo. El líder es aquel que logra dar soluciones de corto plazo, pensando siempre en el mediano y en el largo plazo. Y ese es el desafío hoy. Atender el desajuste que el COVID-19 ha traído en el tejido social y productivo de nuestros países. Y repensar todos los planes, proyectos y miradas que teníamos sobre el desarrollo de nuestras sociedades antes de la pandemia. CEPAL proyecta que en América Latina y el Caribe, producto de la crisis, el número de personas en situación de pobreza se incrementarán en 45 millones adicionales y 28.5 millones más en pobreza extrema, con riesgo de inseguridad alimentaria. Las desigualdades comienzan temprano en la vida y se van haciendo más grandes durante la infancia y la adolescencia, dando a los niños de distintos orígenes oportunidades diferentes para ser felices, para crecer, para desarrollarse, para aprovechar de aquellas oportunidades que les brinda lo público y lo privado. Los pobres y las clases medias bajas asisten a escuelas distintas, viven en lugares distintos, visitan hospitales distintos. La violencia llega a cada una de sus casas de forma diferente. Pocas regiones en el mundo son tan multiétnicas y multiculturales como América Latina y el Caribe. Y si bien nos hemos expandido en términos de atender la ruralidad, donde se concentran los mayores índices de pobreza, las tasas de mortalidad infantil, especialmente en los niños menores de 5 años, siguen siendo más altas si las madres tienen menor calidad y niveles educativos. Según la evaluación socioeconómica post-desastre, PDNA, sobre los impactos de la pandemia por el COVID, realizada con el apoyo del Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo, del Banco Mundial y la Unión Europea, la cuantificación en Ecuador es de aproximadamente 6.467 millones en pérdidas. Solo en el sector social se estima que 1.299 millones se han perdido a causa de la pandemia. La principal amenaza del retroceso post-COVID es invisibilizar a los que menos tienen. Mujeres, jóvenes, personas en movilidad humana, personas con discapacidad, personas privadas de libertad, adultos mayores y más aún el más pobre de los pobres, el que carece de lo básico, la salud y la familia, los niños con enfermedades catastróficas y los niños y adolescentes en acogimiento institucional. El virus ha profundizado las desigualdades existentes y nos devuelve en términos de brechas sociales cerca de 10 años atrás. El impacto mayor, sin embargo, tiene que ver con la inseguridad alimentaria. La realidad del Ecuador es que es el segundo país después de Guatemala con mayores índices de desnutrición crónica infantil en América Latina y el Caribe. Esto es 1.5 de cada 5 niños menores de 5 años en Ecuador sufre desnutrición crónica infantil, comprometiendo su vida, su entorno, su prosperidad y el desarrollo del Ecuador al no cerrar un índice que para otros países ya es un tema superado. La desnutrición crónica infantil no es otra cosa que el retardo de la talla para la edad o retardo del crecimiento, y es asociada directamente a condiciones deficientes en la madre, tales como socioeconómicas, nutricionales y de salud. También se puede atribuir a la recurrencia de enfermedades, a la alimentación inadecuada o a los cuidados inapropiados para el lactante y para el niño pequeño, impidiendo su desarrollo físico y cognitivo. La Vicepresidencia de la República ha comprometido la voz y el trabajo desde el primer día en la lucha contra la desnutrición crónica infantil. Como Gobierno Nacional, en coordinación con las autoridades rectoras, la cooperación internacional, actuamos en este sentido en 2 frentes. El primero, una intervención intensiva contra la desnutrición crónica infantil en los 6 cantones con los índices más altos del país: Santa Elena, Libertad, Guamote, Guaranda, Taisha y Arajuno. Y segundo, la intervención con comedores comunitarios para atender inseguridad alimentaria en zonas que se encuentren en mayor riesgo, con apoyo de la sociedad civil y de la empresa privada, avalado por las Naciones Unidas. Sin lugar a dudas, el índice de pobreza multidimensional y su valoración en 4 dimensiones, salud, educación, trabajo y hábitat, es una herramienta que permite focalizar de mejor manera los esfuerzos por desacelerar los daños y por sostener la protección de quienes menos acceso tienen. Sin embargo, es preciso reflexionar sobre la relevancia de dar un paso adelante en cuanto a la ruralidad se refiere, porque por sus propias características y distancias con la urbanidad requiere ser tratada de forma diferente. En el año 2019, el Ministerio de Agricultura y Ganadería del Ecuador, coordinadamente con ministerios de Inclusión Económica y Social, Educación, Salud Pública, Academia, Programa Mundial de Alimentos, Dirección de Innovación de la CAF y Asesoría Técnica de Fundación Paraguaya, empezó el proyecto de autodiagnóstico de la familia campesina, el cual se basa en una metodología de innovación social que busca mejorar las condiciones de vida de las familias de los productores del Ecuador y con ello aplicar mecanismos de salida de pobreza en 7 dimensiones: ingresos y empleo, salud y medio ambiente, vivienda e infraestructura, educación y cultura, motivación e interioridad, organización y participación y agroproductividad. Estas se encuentran alineadas a los Objetivos del Desarrollo Sostenible 2030 de las Naciones Unidas y a las normas de buenas prácticas agropecuarias en lo que se refiere a la dimensión de agroproductividad. Al momento, el proyecto se encuentra en fase de inicio, con la aplicación del autodiagnóstico a 1.043 familias de 10 provincias del país. Y ahora beneficia a las familias de las supermujeres rurales, que pueden acceder a créditos específicamente en Ban Ecuador, lo cual permitirá que puedan acceder a beneficios que no solo mejore oportunidades de ingresos, sino que mejore el bienestar de su familia. Las familias se autodiagnostican, hacen autoconciencia de su realidad en estas dimensiones, toman decisiones priorizando con metas concretas en el corto y en el mediano plazo de cómo quieren progresar. El gobierno, por su parte, pone a su disposición planes, proyectos y servicios que ya existen, pero que muchas veces no llegan de la forma que necesitan llegar o que no se conocen en la ruralidad o que llegan de una manera distinta al autodiagnóstico de cada familia. Esta herramienta no se centra en cuantificar y tener estadísticas, aunque no las deja de lado porque se registra todo en un sistema de información. Sin embargo, el objetivo principal de su aplicación es cambiar vidas superando la pobreza. Han transcurrido 6 meses desde que nuestro país declaró la emergencia nacional por COVID-19 y empezó una estrategia de 3 fases: resistencia, reactivación y recuperación, con intervenciones escalonadas dirigidas a atender las necesidades de los diferentes periodos de la crisis, así como a distribuir los recursos existentes de una manera sostenible en el tiempo. Nuestro norte: priorizar todos los planes, proyectos, gasto público hacia sanar, comer y producir, poniendo la voz, los derechos y la voluntad de las personas en el centro, haciendo un llamado a la necesidad de fortalecer el multilateralismo, la cooperación internacional, tomando en consideración a los países de ingresos bajos y también a aquellos de ingresos medios, que no cuentan con el financiamiento suficiente para brindar soporte a las familias y a las pequeñas y medianas empresas, que son claves en la lucha contra la pobreza y en la lucha para la recuperación económica y social. La crisis del COVID-19 será profunda y dejará muchas cicatrices. La oportunidad es inimaginable para reenfocar y liderar más y mejores mecanismos de lucha contra la desigualdad y la pobreza en nuestras sociedades. La discusión sobre el desarrollo de los países es la primera discusión ética que hoy debemos tener. Pasar de la coyuntura a atender lo esencial y prioritario. La pandemia nos ha regresado 10 años atrás en cuanto al desafío de la igualdad se refiere. El distanciamiento social solo para cuidarnos del COVID, no para ahondar brechas. Muchas gracias.
The Vice President's talks made visible, arresting, and moving the particular lived conditions of poverty, and particularly of children, an important group who are usually the poorest and comprise the largest share of the poor. And these groups are illuminated by Ecuador's MPI. This concludes a thrilling leadership panel in which we heard the candid and yet stirring reflections of 7 presidents, prime ministers, and vice presidents. The pandemic and recession, they create conditions in which ordinary leaders would fear to tread. Yet they conveyed to us steadfast determination and indomitable hope. We now turn to the co-hosts of this event, each of whom has led work on the borderline of poverty and policy during the pandemic. We begin with Her Excellency Karla Rubilar, Minister of Social Development and Families in Chile. Ministra.
Desde Santiago de Chile, Palacio de la Moneda, y a nombre del gobierno del presidente Sebastian Piñera y desde nuestro Ministerio de Desarrollo Social y Familia, queremos saludar a todos los presidentes y autoridades presentes que estamos unidos en este encuentro hoy, del cual tenemos el honor de ser anfitriones. Agradecemos especialmente la oportunidad y toda la colaboración a OPHI. Naciones Unidas reconocía ya al comienzo de la década del 2000 que la experiencia de vivir en situación de pobreza no puede ser reducida a la falta de ingresos, sino que se expresa en múltiples formas de exclusión y carencia, que incluyen la insuficiencia de recursos y capacidades de diferente tipo, así como la falta de acceso a seguridad, protección, oportunidades y empoderamiento, junto con la inhabilidad que afecta a amplios grupos de la población para ejercer y materializar derechos civiles, culturales, económicos, políticos y sociales. En la dirección de abordar integralmente estos aspectos, las medidas de pobreza multidimensional desarrolladas en las últimas décadas y adoptadas recientemente por algunos países a nivel de sus estadísticas oficiales, constituyen un apoyo fundamental para el diagnóstico, el monitoreo y la evaluación de la efectividad de las políticas sociales. En el caso de Chile, desde comienzos del año 2015 se dispone de mediciones oficiales de la magnitud de la pobreza multidimensional del país, así como de su incidencia específica a nivel de grupos de población y territorios. Para que ello fuera posible, se requirió de un amplio consenso técnico y de la colaboración estrecha de la academia, de los distintos ministerios y servicios públicos, además de la sociedad civil. La medida de la pobreza multidimensional ha puesto en relieve que una proporción superior al 20% de la población del país acumulaba al año 2017, esta proporción no es solo la más alta que la identificada por la medición convencional basada en el ingreso, 8.6 en 2017, sino que incluye a un conjunto mayoritario de personas que forman parte de los hogares que superan el umbral nacional de la pobreza monetaria. Además, de acuerdo a las mediciones realizadas hasta la fecha, la magnitud de la pobreza multidimensional ha resultado más difícil de reducir que la magnitud de la pobreza por ingreso, que registraba hasta el año 2017 una sostenida disminución en nuestro país. Esta evidencia no solo supone que los desafíos de la política social deben atender, revisten una magnitud y complejidad mucho mayor, sino que también que las estrategias orientadas a atender las necesidades de la población deben ahondar y abordar brechas de carácter estructural, para lo cual resulta imprescindible diseñar estrategias innovadoras y generar alianzas a largo plazo con la sociedad civil y el sector privado. Ello motivó, entre otras experiencias, el surgimiento del año 2018 de la iniciativa Compromiso País, que convocó al mundo privado, público, académico y la sociedad civil para trabajar en las medidas concretas que contribuyan a superar la falta de oportunidades y romper con el círculo de la pobreza en sus diferentes dimensiones. Por cierto, este diagnóstico, junto con el cumplimiento de las metas trazadas por la Agenda 2030 en materia de reducción de la pobreza, se ven profundamente desafiados por las consecuencias sociales y económicas que tiene la pandemia COVID-19. Según las proyecciones realizadas por las propias Naciones Unidas, la crisis global podría incrementar en un 8% la pobreza monetaria a nivel mundial, siendo la primera vez que se registran aumentos en los últimos 30 años, sumándose a los más de 700 millones que previo a la pandemia se encontraban ya en situación de pobreza extrema en el mundo. Frente a este escenario, es fundamental sostener el esfuerzo por contar con información estadística confiable, completa, sobre las diferentes dimensiones de la pobreza y sobre sus impactos a corto, mediano y largo plazo que las personas y sus hogares enfrentarán en materia de bienestar. Recientemente en Chile tuvimos la experiencia de realizar una encuesta telefónica de alcance nacional, iniciativa que se gestó gracias a la colaboración entre nuestro Ministerio de Desarrollo Social y Familia, el Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo y el Instituto Nacional de Estadística. Si bien nuestro gobierno ha activado una red de protección social para responder ante la pérdida de ingresos y las diferentes necesidades que experimentan las familias en el contexto de la crisis sanitaria y social, la información aportada por esta encuesta representa un valioso insumo para anticipar efectos sobre la magnitud e intensidad de la pobreza, además de monitorear y evaluar la capacidad de respuesta que la política social tiene frente a la crisis. Entre los principales hallazgos, observamos que casi el 60% de los hogares declaró haber disminuido sus ingresos durante la emergencia, que debió postergar tratamientos de salud en algunos de sus integrantes por temor al contagio, que los hogares redujeron sus gastos en servicios básicos o en relación a la educación, y que los hogares en Chile, en una proporción importante, experimentaron de forma moderada o severa alguna situación de inseguridad alimentaria. Los hogares debieron tomar decisiones drásticas, reducir sus activos, endeudarse o buscar formas alternativas de generar o complementar los ingresos del hogar. De cara a este complejo escenario, el índice de pobreza multidimensional, IPM, se convierte en una herramienta fundamental a la hora de construir perfiles de hogares en pobreza, poniendo relieve en la interacción que se da a las múltiples dimensiones y de cómo las carencias afectan específicamente a algunos integrantes del hogar y estos cómo repercuten sobre la situación del hogar en su conjunto. Por ejemplo, producto de la crisis, en un mismo hogar puede producirse la pérdida de empleo de personas adultas, la exclusión de niños, niñas y adolescentes del sistema escolar y el hacinamiento, situaciones que pueden reforzar otras carencias estructurales de base que el hogar presentaba antes, como por ejemplo la falta de escolaridad, la inserción laboral informal o vivir en un barrio inseguro. Cada uno de los indicadores incluidos en el IPM de Chile, por su parte, contribuye a monitorear grupos específicos que pueden estar siendo más afectados por esta pandemia. El indicador de seguridad social, por ejemplo, da cuenta de la situación de las trabajadoras y trabajadores informales, población que resulta más afectada por la caída de la actividad económica y las restricciones establecidas a la movilidad de las personas, además de ser receptores prioritarios de los mecanismos del Estado. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Minister. Karla Rubilar outlined how Chile's MPI, which has innovative dimensions of the environment and social capital, shaped policies prior to and during the pandemic. And she also signaled that Chile is graciously taking leadership, not only of this event, but also of the 2021 meeting of the South-South Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. We so look forward to that meeting. I'm now delighted to warmly invite Dr. Sania Nishtar, cardiologist, author, activist, and now Minister of Poverty Alleviation in Pakistan, to address us.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. On behalf of the government of Pakistan, I welcome you to this event. And I want to begin by paying rich tribute to Sabina and OPHI, not only for their thought leadership in introducing a new metric for measuring poverty, but also for their efforts to institutionalize its adoption. As you all know, COVID-19 is threatening to wipe out the development gains of the last century. And in doing so, it is also reversing 3 decades of gains in poverty eradication. The MDG on poverty eradication, as you all know, was achieved 5 years ahead of schedule, but now with the corresponding SDG, we are sadly moving backwards and fast. It is in fact the first SDG which refers to poverty alleviation, and it refers to ending poverty in all its forms and dimensions, and not just income poverty. The first SDG calls for action on all kinds of deprivations experienced by poor people in their daily lives, such as poor health, the lack of education, inadequate living standards, disempowerment, and poor quality of work. So I'm very pleased to share with you that even before the pandemic, our government had invested heavily in fighting both monetary as well as multidimensional poverty. Our government had set up the largest social protection program in the history of the country. The approach we have adopted targets different disadvantaged individuals through a coordinated set of more than 140 interventions, all of which are linked by theory of change. There are policies and programs for poor women, for non-affording students, the undernourished, for those that risk medical poverty, for others that need livelihood opportunities. There are interventions under the umbrella for daily wage earners, for our overseas laborers, for orphans and widows, for those that are disabled, for others that are homeless, and there are also labor market interventions packaged in this mix. And all these interventions are grouped under the ESAS umbrella, which is our government signature program, and which in our local language means compassion, as our Prime Minister just outlined. Our government is conscious that now with the pandemic, it is even more important to address multidimensional poverty. So even while we were grappling with COVID, we rolled out a bold new health and nutrition conditional cash transfer program. We are also scaling up our education conditional cash transfer program nationwide because we realize that the costs of COVID are not limited to lives lost and morbidity. The costs are staggering in terms of hunger and malnutrition and children dropping out of school and foregone healthcare. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in my own country, Pakistan, within 10 days of the lockdown, our government committed over $1 billion to deliver emergency cash to over 15 million families. As our Prime Minister just mentioned, this is the largest social protection program in history, delivered end-to-end digitally in the most difficult of circumstances. Our experience with ESAS has taught us that it is possible to make quantum changes in the delivery capability of governments. But in order for that to happen, bold policy, good data, and an unwavering commitment to integrity and transparency in delivery and whole of government mobilization is a prerequisite. And that has been the cornerstone of our poverty alleviation work. I genuinely believe COVID-19 has created an inflection point. Today, we have the power to make decisions to reverse decades of neglect and sparse progress, and to provide social protection to the 4 million people globally that lack it. And it is here that the metrics, such as the MPI, will help tremendously in helping to shape public policy in the right direction. History shows us that disasters and their tragic consequences have a tendency to catalyze broad-based social change. So we now have a one-in-a-generation chance to build a fairer world that ends poverty, inequality, and the climate crisis. Let's not waste this chance. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nishtar. She, like many of you, both speaking and viewing this event, was faced with a crushing challenge: how to design, develop, fund, roll out, monitor, and sustain emergency support to millions in short order. Her address outlined a strategy at once compassionate and competent, ambitious, yet efficient. But what really strikes me was the attitude and the need to follow up on the impact of the policy on the ground with curiosity and honesty, to see what wasn't working, adjust and improve. And these qualities are really crucial to making this the inflection point she described. Dr. Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at UNDP, co-hosts this event and also year-round advances strategic and thoughtful interventions, redressing the deprivations that, as Amartya Sen said, batter and diminish people's lives in many and varied ways. Luis Felipe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Karla Rubilar, Minister of Social Development and Families of Chile, Sania Nishtar, Minister of Poverty Alleviation from Pakistan, queridos Sabina Alcair, Gonzalo Hernández Licona from the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network at OPHI, all the fellow co-organizers and participants and colleagues. It has been particularly illuminating to listen to the heads of the state and government, how they are navigating through these complicated times. I want to start by thanking our co-organizers, the government of Chile, particularly at OPHI, and all the fellow participants for their trust and the opportunity to have this important conversation about the way forward in terms of poverty reduction during the most uncertain times in a century. While the fight against COVID is actively ongoing around the world, manifestations of its devastating impact on people's lives are already being felt and observed. We face an enormous health shock, unfortunately leading to a large number of lost lives. The income of people are being also threatened and vanishing because of an unprecedented rise in unemployment, impacting educational attainment, because of a compounding effect of school closures in a context of high levels of inequality and very poor connectivity. The recently launched Multidimensional Poverty Index 2020, which is a collaboration between UNDP and OPHI, includes also COVID projections and estimates that the pandemic could wipe out up to 10 years of progress in terms of poverty reduction. UNDP has been publishing a global MPI since 2010. At that time, this was quite a revolutionary idea that was launched by UNDP and OPHI, and it was often not very well received by many development partners. At the heart of this effort, there was a call to recognize that while income is always a necessary condition, it is by no means a sufficient approximation to social well-being. A nuanced understanding of the ways in which the pandemic impacts households is key for advancing an inclusive recovery. We in UNDP face this challenge every day in our conversations with our partners on the ground. It is critical that countries take targeted and timely action so that this transitory, albeit devastating shock does not have permanent effects on the lives of people. Clear and timely data are also necessary. Many countries are thus finding innovative ways to generate real-time data on the impact of the pandemic. One example is a recent representative survey in Chile that was mentioned by the minister, where UNDP had the privilege to collaborate with the Minister of Social Development and all the team in the National Institute of Statistics in Chile. The result of this survey shows that the impact of the pandemic is cross-cutting and affects households at all income levels and manifests in various dimensions of well-being. This information will be informing policy responses which have already been proactive and comprehensive in Chile and in many other countries in the region. The Multidimensional Poverty Index can also be an important instrument to coordinate, target, and design policy responses to the crisis. In the context of COVID, identifying and locating those who are most vulnerable to falling into poverty represents an important challenge. It can also be a mechanism to identify beneficiaries of social programs, as is in the case of Costa Rica, as was mentioned by President earlier, where the National Information System and the Social Registry of State Beneficiaries, the CINIRUBE, one of the best registries in the region, conceived with the support of UNDP as an instrument to articulate the social protection from a multidimensional perspective, is being used for the allocation of resources and identification of recipients. Allow me to close by highlighting what I have stated previously. The COVID crisis is fundamentally a systemic crisis that has stressed health, education, social protection, labor market, and fiscal systems simultaneously. It is thus a crisis of governance. In this context, it is critical that the process for designing, implementing, and evaluating policy responses are done with the highest standards of transparency and accountability. As UNDP, we are privileged to support government counterparts, ensuring legitimacy in process and outcomes. One final comment on our work in Honduras, where we are collaborating with government in a project that aims at supporting the process of targeting, registering, and processing payments for independent workers affected by COVID. We expect the disbursements to be released in a few weeks after a very strict process to design and implement a program to reach people previously not registered in programs of this sort. Our support includes robust methodologies and oversight measures to ensure transparency and due diligence. Thank you again to the government of Chile, to OPHI, for the opportunity to co-organize this important event, to all the speakers whose caliber and engagement are a testament to the importance of the Multidimensional Poverty Index as a key instrument to help countries navigate through these very uncertain times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis Felipe, for such rich, detailed, country-specific, and yet generally relevant observations from a governance perspective. And I think that that really highlights the intersections that we need to explore between leadership, governance and management, and measurement, and how these can come together in new ways, and how we can learn from one another in doing so. This side event has been organized every year since 2013 with the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, or MPPN. And I now warmly invite Dr. Gonzalo Hernández Licona, director of that network, to take the floor. Gonzalo.
Thanks, Sabina. Good morning and good afternoon. What we are doing now is just witnessing live heads of the states and ministers exchanging ideas about poverty and how to tackle the COVID pandemic. The event is a good example of how can we move together forward? How can we build back better? And this is by exchanging ideas openly. The Multidimensional Poverty Network, co-organizer of the event, is precisely about that. We started in 2013 when the network was launched together with Professor Amartya Sen. At that time, if you recall, there were only a couple of countries engaged in measuring poverty in a multidimensional way. Then things accelerated. due to this exchange happening within the network. So we saw Colombia, South Africa, Chile, the Seychelles, Mexico, exchanging ideas. Now we have 60 countries in the network and 20 international institutions. And this enthusiasm jumped into the UN, and now we have target 1.2 of the SDGs, which is about reduction of poverty in all dimensions by 2030. We celebrate this event hosted by the governments of Chile and Pakistan. Thanks, Ministers Karla and Sania, for sharing your thoughts and ideas. In the case of Chile, we missed our annual event of the network this year, but we are planning to have it next year. We invite you to join the Multidimensional Poverty Network and be with us in Chile next year. In the meantime, we are paving the road to Santiago, El Camino de Santiago, with events like this one. Thank you very much.
Gonzalo mentioned SDG 1.2.2, and it's a good moment to recognize the World Bank, UNICEF, which we'll speak later, and UNDP, which have recently facilitated countries to report their national MPI as SDG indicator 1.2.2. But thank you so much, Gonzalo, for your leadership. Earlier, as the president of CONAVAL in Mexico, the first country to launch a national MPI in 2010, and now within the MPPN. We now turn to the ministerial and institutional panel. All listed speakers will present, but the order of two speakers has been adjusted. I'm delighted now to invite Cecilia Sharp, Assistant Director General of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, to share her remarks.
Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends. A global pandemic was not part of the plan when the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed. We were prepared for an uphill struggle, but recent events have made the climb that much steeper and changed the setting in a fundamental way. But what has not changed is our firm commitment to eradicate poverty in all its forms everywhere. The members and leaders of the MPP network have today demonstrated their leadership and commitment to work with multidimensional poverty, share knowledge, experiences, and prioritize interventions benefiting the poor people living in poverty. The pandemic has shown that there is a need now, more than ever, to prevent further setbacks and to move our positions forward. At SIDA, we are proud of being partner of this network and to financially support the work of the network through OPHI. His Excellency President Ghani was telling us about his experiences from using MPI in Afghanistan. In SIDA's multidimensional poverty analysis, we have been relying on national MPI data from Afghanistan for our own understanding of poverty in the country. And we are using that in planning and implementing our bilateral cooperation with Afghanistan. This is to say that the more we share knowledge about the face of poverty in countries, the better we get at aligning our understanding and collectively address the context-specific needs of people living in poverty. And we have no time to lose. The global pandemic and its economic consequences is spreading around the globe. During the past month at SIDA, we have adapted our support to respond to the crisis. This has implied sharpened emphasis on the poorest, identifying those that risk falling back into poverty, and allowing our partners to flexibly adjust their programs to respond to those in most urgent need. This current crisis has emphasized how rapidly the levels of poverty can rise if we don't recognize overlapping and interlinked dimensions of poverty. This highlights the importance of the work that OPHI and the members are doing to continuously advance the understanding of poverty. I believe that all our previous work has prepared us better to understand the challenging that we are now facing. To conclude, facing the new and remaining challenges on our way towards eradicating poverty can only be done in partnerships. SIDA is always open to discuss multidimensional approaches to poverty and how we can jointly make progress in achieving global goal number 1 in Agenda 2030. And we look forward to continue the good collaboration with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for your voice, for your collaboration, and the unwavering professional attention to these topics at SIDA. SIDA has become an institutional advocate and leading voice on interlinked dimensions of poverty and on empowering poor women and men as active agents of their own lives and life plans, and doing so on a shared planet. So thank you so very much. In the last in-person UN Statistics Commission back in March, 8 of the 13 countries presenting were from Africa. And Angola and Ghana are the 2 countries that launched their national MPIs most recently. So work on MPI is ongoing across the continent. Today, I am delighted to invite Jackson Matumbo, Minister in the Presidency of South Africa and Steering Committee member of MPPN, to speak to us. Minister, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is a great honor for us to be addressing this esteemed gathering today as we continue to celebrate 75 years of the establishment of the United Nations. This meeting takes place at a time when countries are dealing with challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. South Africa has also not been spared of this pandemic, and we have just moved to alert level 1 of the national lockdown as part of our risk-adjusted strategy, prompted partly by the declining trends we see in COVID-19 infections, but also prompted by the need to fully open the economy so that the people of South Africa can fully resume engaging in economic activities to support their families. Your Excellencies, the relevance of this meeting cannot be overemphasized, as South Africa has experienced the vital role that data plays in informing plans and decisions towards addressing the manifestations of this pandemic. Our National Statistics Office, Statistics South Africa, promptly conducted rapid online surveys to provide insights about the impact of COVID-19 on the economic and social well-being of households in the country. These were conducted soon after the country went into alert level 5, national lockdown, at the height of the COVID-19 infections, which had placed the country on the highest level of restrictions ever seen in our history. The rapid surveys indicated temporal and permanent loss of employment, reduction or loss of income, increase in incidences of hunger, amongst other challenges. A social and economic relief package that was equal to 10% of our GDP, and indeed the biggest package in our history, was established by our government to address these challenges. In addition to other interventions targeting SMMEs and the business community in general. Targeting the right recipients and beneficiaries then became a crucial part of the solution. It was important for South Africa to continue to be led by sound evidence in planning, deciding, and distribution of interventions. Data and statistics have become quite critical in our daily decisions, not only in South Africa, but the world over. The South African Multidimensional Poverty Index that we call SAMPI, a South African multidimensional poverty measure, played a vital role in identifying areas where interventions are to be directed. Working with the National Statistics Office and its provincial offices, we were able to profile districts, municipalities, and communities to identify areas of need. Before the pandemic hit, we could already see that the outputs of SAMPI were taking root in our country to inform planning and implementation of poverty reduction programs. We have used the SAMPI to inform our provincial growth development frameworks, provincial poverty eradication master plans, and provincial spatial development frameworks, and the integrated development plans at local government levels. We have seen the SAMPI used to better understand communicable diseases such as tuberculosis, which has strong correlates with poverty. Our country has a social welfare program that caters for over 17 million South Africans who are mostly the elderly, the disabled, and needy children from poor households up to the age of 18 years. Children are perhaps the most innocent victims of the scourge of poverty. Targeting efforts to expand the child support grant, which is one of the South Africa's most successful social protection instruments for addressing childhood poverty, utilize the SAMPI to confirm if the targeting measures were reaching the intended groups. These efforts are rooted in addressing the very real lived experiences of the most vulnerable in our societies. Civil society organizations have used the data to contribute to our government's cause for development, especially on matters of addressing issues of poverty. The ability of the SAMPI to provide information at much lower levels of geography is key to galvanizing responses from society at large. All this, Your Excellencies, is testimony of how data, multidimensional poverty data to be specific, can help change lives. Currently, South Africa is planning for the next population census to be conducted in 2021. This very important undertaking will avail fresh data on multidimensional poverty in South Africa to us policymakers for better understanding of the poverty situation, better planning, more accurate targeting, and most useful for poverty reduction strategy development. Meetings such as these, where countries can share experiences and learn from one another, are important and provide a basis for the use of empirical evidence in our daily efforts to address the poverty challenge. Through the use of such evidence, as countries, we are well in the right path of achieving sustainable development goals and Agenda 2030. Let me wish all of you well during these trying times. The people of South Africa send their warmest regards to all of you. Working together as people of the world, we will overcome this COVID-19 challenge. We again, as a country, would like to thank the governments of Chile, government of Pakistan, and OPHI for hosting this very important event. Of course, Sabina, we also want to thank you and your wonderful team for this excellent moderation of this event. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Your description of SAMPI being used in so many different ways and updated in different data sources is electrifying, and it is worth waiting for. The Multidimensional Poverty Index is often called a high-resolution lens, and when core MPI questions are embedded in the census, it becomes the closest we have to a picture which is not pixelated. Like Nepal, like South Africa, like Colombia, like Bhutan, I hope that many countries embed core MPI questions in their upcoming census round. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. Distinguished delegates, very good morning to all. First, I wish to thank Mr. Minister of Social Development and Family of Chile for organizing this side event discussion on multidimensional poverty. This is a timely topic indeed. As part of global community, Indonesia has high commitment to make SDGs working. We are pleased to report that Indonesia has reached single-digit poverty in 2018. This motivates us to achieve zero chronic poverty in 2024, 5 years earlier than our SDGs target. Alleviating chronic poverty needs a comprehensive method. We have used a multidimensional approach to sharpen our policies to aim at this goal, including expanding access to health, education, and economic opportunities. All of these efforts have shown significant impacts on poverty reduction. A collaborative work is the key strategy in managing a multidimensional approach. The outbreak of the novel coronavirus threatened Indonesia entire gain in reducing poverty. Currently, we have over more than 250,000 cases. The pandemic has declined the economic activities and decreased people's income. While all are affected, this pandemic hurts the poor the most. Women, people with disability, and older people are among the most vulnerable during pandemic. This situation will eventually affect Indonesia's poverty reduction target. In responding to this pandemic, the government issued a fiscal stimulus by expanding social assistance with increased benefits. We hope the intervention could help to dampen the effect of the crisis and prevent the poor and vulnerable from falling deeper into poverty. Moving forward to recover people's welfare, we include social protection reform in the government work plan 2021. The social protection reform prevent the poverty increase due to the COVID-19 pandemic and accelerate zero chronic poverty in 2024. More inclusive data is a vital pillar to reduce the chronic poor. The integration of anti-poverty programs is the tax priority. By integrating social assistance and basic service provision, we address the multidimensional poverty issues. Low living standards as well as limited access to health, education, and financial services can trap the poor in a cycle of intergenerational poverty. There's non-monetary dimension of poverty. If left unaddressed, will prolong and preserve poverty. Eliminating multidimensional poverty requires concrete strategies. Indonesia's social protection reform will focus on accurate data as the entry point. To better identify the vulnerable groups, the President of Indonesia has mandated developing a social registry. Coordination among stakeholders is also crucial to ensure the program integration, especially between social assistance, basic services provision, and economic empowerment. We promote social and economic empowerment of women to help them out of poverty with multidimensional approach. Sustainable funding is needed to manage all these initiatives. Finally, adaptive social protection is crucial to minimize disaster impoverishing impacts such as caused by current pandemic. However, with 34 provinces in over 17,000 islands, we are aware that our success relies heavily on the effective implementation of poverty reduction programs at the subnational level. We will strengthen institutional framework to enable better coordination across government institutions, continue to invest in creating employment opportunities and business skills at the local level. Even though Indonesia used a multidimensional approach to fight poverty, measuring poverty does not always require a multidimensional index. The multidimensional poverty index may still be challenging to implement in Indonesia due to its complexity. For instance, the social protection reform is not reflected by MPI, even though it contributes greatly to reduce poverty. MPI would be difficult for the local government to calculate and interpret. It will also be hard to use MPI as a comparative indicator among regions in Indonesia. For this reason mentioned, Indonesia is currently not using the MPI method. Lastly, I believe that a strong commitment from all stakeholders both in national and international levels, is crucial to reduce multidimensional poverty in all its forms. Let us working hand in hand to achieve the SDGs target. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Suharto Mono Arfa, Minister of National Development and Planning, Indonesia, noted the importance of applying a multidimensional framework to the measurement of poverty and the need to include indicators of social protection, to use it to inform targeting measures based on registry data, and to illuminate diverse situations. Other countries do each of these, but it is vital to express doubts and criticisms openly. This welcome attitude accelerates communication and innovation. Thank you so much, Minister. And so in that case, we will call on Her Excellency Arunzada from Mongolia to deliver her remarks. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. It is an honor to be here with you and all the other eminent panelists to discuss the importance of multidimensional poverty measurement at this time of COVID, unprecedented vulnerabilities. In my previous role as a chairperson of National Statistical Office, I saw the technical value of the MPI as a tool for analyzing the overlapping deprivations experienced by poor people. Now, as a Minister of Social Protection and Labor, I see how useful it can be for the policies. And of course, I will work now with the technical team to develop a measure and ensure it is used at the decision-making level. In Mongolia, we have worked with the Asian Development Bank to develop a pilot national MPI with 18 indicators across 5 dimensions, based on consultation with stakeholders across the country. So these were just the first steps, and now we must work with a more recent data to develop a final measure and launch it with a robust communications strategy to promote its use and sustainability, to see how the cooperation among ministries should be running, like the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Health and Construction, roads, and so on. So the initial findings from the pilot MPI suggested the importance of the interlinkages of deprivation. It showed more than 2/5 of people in the country were deprived in 4 or more of the indicators. So this implies the need for coordinated action across the government to better reach population with joint policy and look only at the income and expenditure, not look always just in monetary dimension. So last year, Mongolia submitted a voluntary national review at a high-level political forum of the UN. And we have reporting that 10% of the population were living in the multidimensional poverty using the global MPI produced by OPHI and the UNDP. So the 2020 global MPI release showed that this represents a decrease from the figures of 10 years ago, and that Mongolia is actually on the track to meet SDG targets 1.2. So it is crucial to maintain the evaluation of the progress and be sure that the progress is maintained, and even to this pandemic threats is there to undo it. The government of Mongolia has taken a proactive response to the COVID-19 pandemic and has been successfully limiting the spread and severity of the virus in the country. Actually, we didn't have any local transmissions yet. And I hope it will be staying so. So, however, the suspension of schooling and the reduction of the export-based economy has created increased vulnerability for many Mongolians. The government of Mongolia has been taking really quick measures with the development partners together to protect all the population. So the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, we're working to mitigate these negative impacts by increasing social assistance, helping businesses to safely operate and coordinate with other stakeholders to align efforts. And in the future, of course, MPI will be very much helpful to identify particularly vulnerable population to enable us to better target our programs and reach those really left behind ones. In times of crisis, especially, it is more important than ever to work together to use all available evidence and effectively tackle the poverty. So MPI is a critical tool to help eliminate vulnerabilities, inequalities, to encourage more efficient poverty reduction policies. So I look forward to the development of the national MPI for Mongolia and reflect our context and priorities and help. And I am sure that MPI can help guide our policy makings. Especially now when I was at the measurement side and now I am on the policy making side. I know really that only with the better data and better evidence, better policies can be done to make the lives of the people better. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank MPPN, as well the governments of Chile and Pakistan and the UNDP, of course, for organizing this event. And I'm very much looking forward to look further with Oxford University and MPI colleagues to use MPI index in Mongolia. It has been fascinating to hear about what others have already done, and we are learning what we can do and achieve in the future with the MPI index. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Under the statistical leadership of Aryunzada Ayush, now the Minister of Labor and Social Protection, Mongolia started to design its MPI. And she shared the fact that 40% of Mongolians are deprived in 4 or more of the indicators of their trial measure at the same time. That sentence captured at a glance what's new about the MPI rather than a dashboard. It shows the overlapping deprivations that strike a single person or a family. And we wish you all of the very best as you continue from a new angle to work on poverty in all its dimensions. We now turn to Rebecca Greenstein, who serves as the Ibero-American Secretary General and who has been a firm supporter of multidimensional poverty measurement and analysis from the beginning, for her remarks.
Thank you so much, Sabina. Quiero agradecer especialmente al PNUD, al gobierno de Chile y Pakistán, así como a OPHI, al Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, por invitarme a este excelente panel. El trabajo que han hecho con el índice de pobreza multidimensional es uno de los más importantes y mayores avances en el área de desarrollo humano y política pública dirigida al combate a la pobreza y las desigualdades en el desarrollo. La pobreza es un tema complejo, no es solo un umbral sobre cierto monto de dólares al día. Es un fenómeno vivo, persistente, dinámico, cambiante. Y el índice de pobreza multidimensional captura mucho más esta complejidad y nos saca de la descripción de una fotografía para poder ver una película y una realidad evolutiva. Sin MPI estaríamos dejando a gente atrás, sin siquiera saberlo, ya que la mayoría de los países tienen más pobres multidimensionales que pobres según el umbral de $2 por día. A través del MPI, ahora podemos encontrar a aquellos en el medio de este solapamiento y sacarlos de su invisibilidad. Esto es un logro gigantesco y llamamos a las organizaciones nacionales e internacionales y a los países a unirse al MPI Network como un elemento fundamental en esta crisis multidimensional. Sabemos que aumentará la pobreza mundial considerablemente. Solo en América Latina, casi 50 millones de personas medidas por la línea de pobreza. El MPI nos permite incorporar dimensiones prioritarias que no salen en esta medición, como son las áreas de salud y de educación, donde sabemos que están aumentando las brechas de desigualdad. Solo en América Latina, casi 32 millones de niños han quedado excluidos del sistema educativo y se esperan tasas elevadas de deserción escolar. Si no trabajamos en esto con la mayor urgencia, habrá un gran aumento de la pobreza multidimensional en la región, a pesar de las transferencias de dinero que están haciendo los países. Y esto tendrá efectos permanentes en la vida de estas familias si no lo evitamos. Así que la relación, además del MPI con la ruralidad, del MPI con la informalidad, del MPI con el cambio climático, del MPI con la dimensión de género, son temas centrales, no solo para el análisis del impacto de la pandemia, sino principalmente también para la recuperación, para la reconstrucción post-pandemia, para una reconstrucción resiliente y para alinearnos con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible sin dejar a nadie atrás. Keep up the good work and really congratulations for this wonderful event.
Muchísimas gracias. Rebecca introduced the need to persuade and to secure political commitment proactively during COVID. It's a new theme that we haven't yet encountered, but as hosts of an Ibero-American Heads of State Summit next November on innovations to achieve the MDGs, she also introduced a different angle and a different community of integrating MPI with aspects of rurality, of feminism, of equality. And it's these new frontiers in which we very much are looking forward to exploring, to learning, and hopefully to serving better. We are now very honored to invite M.A. Manon, the Minister of Planning of Bangladesh, to deliver his results. Minister Manon.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Presidents and Prime Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be in this important side event on Multidimensional Poverty Index, Build Back Better. I would like to convey our thanks to governments of Chile and government of Pakistan and Ms. Sabina Al-Khairi, Director of Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, for inviting us to join this important event. Despite many challenges, for decades, Bangladesh has been on the forefront of women's empowerment, microfinance, and advancing human development as a whole. We are deeply committed to SDG 1, that is ending poverty in all its forms. We are honored to be part of the Poverty Network, the MPPN, to share our experience in advancing capabilities and reducing multidimensional poverty. In Bangladesh, we are about to finalize and launch a national MPI. Our national MPI has been produced by Bangladesh Planning Commission and Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, with support from UNICEF Bangladesh and OPHI. We chose an MPI because monetary poverty overlooked disadvantages that deeply scar people's lives. Our national MPI would be an alternative official statistic of poverty measurement, along with the monetary measure of poverty. It provides a platform that sheds light on interconnections between problems in living standards, education, and health in disaggregated detail. Our national MPI will provide a foundation for Bangladesh strategies and policies in this regard. After sustained economic growth and achieving lower middle income status in 2015, Bangladesh now faces the uncertainty of COVID-19. You would be glad to know that the government of Bangladesh, under our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, has allocated a stimulus package, which is just about 4% of our GDP, to support our industries and service sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, we see our national MPI as a powerful new tool for rationally planning and achieving the eradication of multidimensional poverty in Bangladesh. Strong and rigorous poverty-focused measures provide vital information about the most vulnerable so that they can be protected from hardships of poverty. Our national MPI is designed to inform how to target areas and people who are especially vulnerable. Poverty indeed is at crossroads. Our roadmap to poverty eradication has been rewritten by the pandemic. It has forced us to reconsider our plans and strategies. The MPI helps provide a tool in this regard. It shows what poverty looks like and suggests how policies can empower people to emerge from the misery stronger and more resilient. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Minister Manan. He shared that Bangladesh is about to launch its national MPI and a linked child MPI. Most national MPIs are now disaggregated by age in order to profile children's deprivations. And at times, intra-household or gendered analyses or linked child MPIs are often created so that governments have a coherent, simple set of linked poverty measures that create a clear roadmap to ending poverty among all sectors and ages. We now turn to Mohammed Aslam, Minister of National Planning, Housing and Infrastructure in the Maldives.
Well, thank you very much, Sabina. Good morning, everyone. The whole idea of MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index, was brought to my attention about a year ago, and I found the whole idea to be very simply by the name. Sounded a concept from theoretical physics, looking at things from just one dimensional point of view to a multiple dimension, definitely made it clear to me that things would be much clearer. And now that we've looked at it, I think that is very true, and we now see things from a completely different perspective, and things are much clearer for us to see. And obviously poverty cannot be measured just with one dimension, and we know that people who earn a handsome monthly wage still live are deprived from other basic needs that any human being should have. So we launched our MPI this June in the midst of COVID-19. The entire government was very much for it, so it didn't take much of convincing for the cabinet to endorse this. And we find this to be a very relevant tool for a small island developing state like Maldives, where we have the issue of remoteness and getting the services accessible to the islanders who are dispersed. In the case of Maldives, 188 islands. Some islands are very small in its population and size. We have a few which are overcrowded. They all have different issues. They all have different things that, in which they are deprived of. So if we look at the poverty from an income point of view, our poverty, it remains at about 8% of the population. But looking at things from a multidimensional point of view, it's about 3.6 times more than that. So we use the 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standards for the case of Maldives. And we find that in places like the capital, where people obviously have earn a lot more than those who live in rural areas, they have a completely different set of issues that the government needs to address. Some of these things, the issues, obviously we know, but this quantifies the problem, in a systematic way. So I find this to be a very useful tool, and we'll be using this for us to be informed in making our decisions, with the planning and going forward with the country. Obviously, like anybody else, COVID, has hit us hard. We've also learned that depending on just one single industry for our economy, which happens to be tourism, we are very vulnerable to this sort of shocks that we are experiencing right now. For the last 7-8 months, we've not been earning any foreign currency because virtually no tourists arrive. So with the COVID, obviously we need to rethink on how we go forward and the challenges we face. A lot of people, like many speakers have mentioned that this will take us back many years. A lot of achievements we made will be pushed back, and then we have to restart some of those things. But perhaps I look at it from a very positive point of view. I'm an earth scientist from my academic background, and in earth science, the forces that are destructive also gives opportunities for new creations. So I believe that the pandemic that we all are experiencing right now will show us opportunities for us to do things better and look at things from a different point of view. So post-COVID response planning is currently underway with us, and we'll be focusing very much on education, health and infrastructure. We'll be focusing very much on investing in human capital. This is crucial for us to build back better. So we definitely need to diversify our economy. We cannot simply be relying on tourism. We need to be self-sufficient, promote agriculture, fisheries. So need to be more self-sufficient, as I said. So we are, in the process of making these plans. And I thank very much the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, for being with us and showing us the direction, to be part of this. We are very privileged to be, part of the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, and look forward to be engaged with everyone, and then learn from each other. And so, Sabina, thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Minister Aslam used an image from physics to describe how MPI offers a systematic quantification of disadvantage. In June 2020, as you heard, Maldives launched its MPI among the first 3 SIDS, with Seychelles and the Dominican Republic to have national measures. And his positive view of this distressing situation is refreshing. I, for one, look forward to coming as a tourist to visit as soon as we can. I'm delighted now to call on Ángeles Moreno Bao, Secretary of State for International Cooperation of Spain. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sabina. Buenas tardes y gracias por esta oportunidad de compartir impresiones acerca de la crisis multidimensional que atravesamos. En el contexto de esta crisis sanitaria y económica, se hace más necesario que nunca el uso de índices de pobreza multidimensional como el que se aborda en este evento. Las últimas cifras publicadas en julio de 2020 por el PNUD y la iniciativa de Oxford sobre la pobreza y el desarrollo humano para el índice de pobreza multidimensional mundial mostraban que antes de que se produjera la pandemia del COVID-19 se estaba avanzando en la lucha contra la pobreza multidimensional. 65 de los 75 países estudiados redujeron significativamente sus niveles de pobreza multidimensional entre 2000 y 2019. Estos datos anteriores a la pandemia eran un mensaje de esperanza, pero ahora estos progresos están en peligro. La COVID-19 está teniendo un profundo impacto en los niveles de desarrollo, Las simulaciones realizadas en 70 países del mundo en desarrollo basadas en los efectos previstos del virus en tan solo 2 componentes del índice de pobreza multidimensional mundial, la nutrición y la asistencia a la escuela, ponen de manifiesto la magnitud del impacto que podría tener la crisis si no ponemos remedio. En los escenarios estudiados, entre personas multidimensionalmente pobres o vulnerables, subalimentadas y con niños en edad de asistir a la escuela primaria que ya no lo hacen, se estima que los niveles de pobreza podrían retroceder de 8 a 10 años. Los datos también revelan que la carga de la pobreza multidimensional, de la misma forma que la pobreza monetaria, recae desproporcionadamente en los niños. La mitad de los 1.300 millones de pobres aún no han cumplido los 18 años, mientras que 107 millones tienen 60 años o más. Según datos del IPM de 2019, en América Latina y el Caribe, 39 millones de personas, esto es un 7,5% de la población, viven en hogares que se encuentran en situación de pobreza multidimensional aguda, lo que significa que experimentan privaciones en 1/3 o más de los 10 indicadores de salud, educación y niveles de vida asociados a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. En la región de América Latina y el Caribe, aproximadamente 1 de cada 10 niños vive en un hogar en situación de pobreza multidimensional aguda. El IPM, con su información sobre el nivel y la composición de la pobreza, nos proporciona los datos necesarios para determinar con precisión dónde y cómo se manifiesta la pobreza. Se trata de un instrumento clave, por tanto, para que los encargados de la formulación de políticas sepamos cómo y dónde dirigir los recursos y nuestras intervenciones. Abordar los desafíos descritos requiere un enfoque diferente que vaya más allá de la mejora de los ingresos. El enfoque multidimensional pasa por diseñar políticas que sean sostenibles fiscal y financieramente a lo largo del ciclo económico, por fortalecer instituciones en todos los niveles de gobierno, por construir corresponsabilidad ciudadana, por consolidar políticas universales que conjuguen múltiples dimensiones de bienestar a lo largo del ciclo de vida. Pasa también por integrar el medio ambiente y los recursos naturales en las agendas locales. Todo ello debe desarrollarse teniendo en consideración el contexto, las especificidades y las vulnerabilidades de cada país. Disponer de información y datos que permitan una mirada multidimensional nunca ha sido tan relevante. España fue el primer país de la OCDE en unirse a la red de pobreza multidimensional y desde la cooperación española hacemos un uso intensivo de los índices multidimensionales en la planificación y la ejecución de nuestras actuaciones. Por todo ello, consideramos que el índice de pobreza multidimensional debe ser uno de los indicadores clave de desempeño en la Agenda 2030 y estamos plenamente comprometidos con su consolidación como el indicador clave del ODS primero. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, secretaria. Ángeles Moreno-Bao spoke of the reduction of the global MPI. And I want to return to her first remark, which was how it reduced across 75 countries and 5 billion people. Because something that tacks on to her last point is that the fastest country to reduce the MPI was Sierra Leone. And it did so in the period 2013 to 2017, which was during the time that Ebola raged in that country. And so this is somehow evidence that we can learn from other countries, and we can learn from countries in times of duress how to face our current situation better. I'm also delighted to have the voice of Spain, which, as she said, was the first European country to join the MPPN. Thank you so much. I'm now pleased for the third year running to invite Rosemarie Edelon, Undersecretary of the National Economic and Development Authority and expert on the MPI of the Philippines, to share how they have navigated this difficult COVID crossroad. Rosemarie.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, all protocols observed. At the outset, we reiterate the call to improve measurement methodology on well-being that is relevant in a VUCA world, one that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In behalf of the like-minded group of developing countries, supporters of middle-income countries, we again point out that current measures of development based on per capita income cannot adequately take into account socioeconomic inequalities, multidimensional poverty, and vulnerabilities to socioeconomic risks. The COVID-19 pandemic has stressed the need to cover all these aspects and more, perhaps, in characterizing the level of development. In deciding how best to assist countries the measure of development should also reflect how governments are able to protect their citizens against the adverse effects of various risks, COVID-19 just being the latest one. We have found the MPI framework, which stresses the importance of addressing deprivation in multiple dimensions, as a very useful framework in formulating public investment programs and the policy reform agenda. The Philippines MPI consists of 13 indicators belonging to 4 dimensions of education, health and nutrition, housing, water and sanitation, and employment. The education dimension, we found, has the largest share or contribution to overall deprivation at more than 36%. And for this reason, our interventions are focused on increasing access to education at all levels. And for poor families with members who are of school age, government provides a regular cash transfer on the condition that the children go to school and undergo regular checkup. We also have regular programs covering the other dimensions. And in addition, we have instituted structural reforms covering this, like the First 1,000 Days Act, Supplementary Feeding Act, Universal Health Care, Expanded Maternity Leave Act, and other things covering the other dimensions to ensure that the gains will be robust. And we have been achieving significant gains before COVID. In terms of income poverty, we have seen at least 6 million Filipinos graduate from poverty between 2015 and 2018. Similarly, we have seen a 6.6-point reduction in the percentage of multidimensionally deprived families between 2016 and 2017. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has demonstrated the need to include another dimension, which is resiliency. And we hope that the research community led by Dr. Sabina will provide more guidance on this. What would be the relevant indicators of resiliency? How do we incorporate this? Should this be added as just another dimension, or do we need to include this, mainstream this, indicators of vulnerability in each dimension? Another important research is to determine how COVID-19 has affected the MPI levels of families. Note that some indicators are quite robust to temporary shocks, but we need to know which ones are not. So in fact, we may need to sharpen some of these indicators to make them relevant in a VUCA world. As with other countries, at the onset of the COVID-19, most of the country has been on lockdown, and we also embarked on a massive social amelioration program for the bottom 75%. And as we build back better, we need to be ready for the next shock, for such is the VUCA world. Our strategy currently is to engage all of society in the fight against COVID-19 while restarting social and economic activities. On the latter, we have prioritized 5 areas: health system improvement, food security, learning continuity, digital transformation, and ecological integrity. It's also multidimensional. Overall, we still believe that well-being is multidimensional, and we will continue to use MPI, but we do hope that resiliency be deliberately considered in the definition and measure as well. Thank you very much.
Rosemary crystallized the current situation as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And she traced the conversation between measurement, public investment, and policy reform. But exacerbated by COVID, she also called really for us to think again about shocks and about how to measure and create resilience. And how do we do so in a way that is very deliberate and forward-thinking? I hear the challenge, and we will think about it and seek together to address it. I now turn to Dr. Daniel Gomez Gaviria, Subdirector in the Department of National Planning of Colombia. Colombia, with South Africa and China, are steering committee members of the MPPN. So it is very appropriate that we start and close the ministerial voices with theirs. Daniel, you have the floor.
Sabina, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation to participate in this event. The Multidimensional Poverty Index is very much ingrained in our policy-making process, as you all know. I will switch to Spanish. I had prepared my presentation in Spanish. Entonces, muchas gracias de nuevo por la invitación. El índice de pobreza multidimensional es una de las herramientas claves en Colombia para la formulación de políticas para reducir vulnerabilidad vulnerabilidad y pobreza. En particular, quiero contarles un poquito de cómo lo hemos usado y qué rol está jugando dentro del Plan Nacional de Desarrollo y dentro de la coyuntura actual de la pandemia. Importante mencionar que dentro del Plan Nacional de Desarrollo del actual gobierno, se buscó recuperar un espacio de coordinación interinstitucional que es indispensable para la reducción de pobreza. Como el mismo índice nos indica, pues hay una multiplicidad de dimensiones que requieren el concurso de diferentes ministerios, diferentes entidades gubernamentales y requieren un espacio de coordinación y de formulación de política. En Colombia creamos con el plan la Mesa de Equidad, que es una instancia de alto nivel liderada por el presidente de la República para lograr establecer directrices para los sectores y entidades del gobierno nacional, aprobar diseño e implementación de acciones, programas para pegarle a cada uno de los temas críticos del índice de pobreza multidimensional. Este espacio nos sirve también para no solo lograr alinear la política general de lucha contra la pobreza y por la equidad, sino que también nos permite tener un espacio de seguimiento de las acciones. En el marco del COVID, esta mesa de equidad ha sido fundamental. En la mesa de equidad, desde que empezó la pandemia, hemos podido hacer seguimiento al índice de pobreza multidimensional de Colombia a partir de simulaciones para entender cuál iba a ser el impacto de esta emergencia en las diferentes dimensiones. Además, pues por supuesto, analizamos en la mesa el impacto en pobreza monetaria. Muy importante destacar que en Colombia, entre el 2010 y 2019, 2010 fue cuando empezamos a calcular el índice de pobreza multidimensional, se ha reducido la incidencia de la pobreza en 12.9 puntos porcentuales, de 30.4 a 17.5. En el marco de la emergencia, lo que hemos visto es que la pobreza monetaria podía subir cualquier cosa entre 4 y 10 puntos porcentuales, y algunos estimativos indican que más. En Colombia la pobreza monetaria estaba en 27% el año pasado. Cualquier estimativo, el rango de estimativos indica que podía subir hasta 40%. Les voy a contar un poquito de qué hemos hecho para reducir ese impacto, pero en el índice de pobreza multidimensional, muy interesante, lo que hemos visto es que la afectación principalmente iba a ser en zonas urbanas, no tanto en rurales, a pesar de que el IPM es mayor en niveles en zonas rurales. Pero entonces estos análisis iniciales nos indicaban que en general a nivel nacional el IPM podía subir 1 punto porcentual en 2020 por los efectos de la desaceleración económica inducidos por la situación de la pandemia. Entonces, lo que vimos rápidamente era que había que proteger la pérdida de capital humano que impactaría dimensiones de niñez, juventud, educación y salud del índice. En ese orden de ideas, implementamos 2 programas nuevos de transferencias monetarias no condicionadas, el ingreso solidario, que busca llegar con una transferencia no condicionada mensualmente a 3 millones de hogares en condición de pobreza y vulnerabilidad que no estaban cubiertos por ninguno de los programas sociales del gobierno, que todos eran condicionados de alguna manera. También creamos el programa de devolución del IVA, que inicialmente se concibió como una herramienta para corregir la regresividad del impuesto al valor agregado, pero que en el marco de la pandemia pues decidimos escalarlo rápidamente para llegar a 1 millón de hogares en pobreza extrema con una compensación por IVA y que se hizo a través de las plataformas de giros de Familias en Acción y Colombia Mayor. 2 programas en Colombia, el Familias en Acción encaminado a la acumulación, a incentivar la formación de capital humano, salud, educación en niños, de familias vulnerables, y Colombia Mayor, el programa para adultos mayores. Entonces, los dos programas de transferencias monetarias apuntaban a proteger la formación de capital humano. Además de esto, en la Mesa de Equidad y en el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, enfocamos esfuerzos en mejoramientos de viviendas, mejoramientos de viviendas rurales, protección a la conexión a servicios básicos como agua y alcantarillado, esto en el marco de la emergencia, pero también en el marco de la recuperación. Estamos enfatizando la inversión con recursos públicos y privados en mejoramientos de acueductos alcantarillados en todo el territorio nacional. Sacamos la política de Internet rural para cerrar brechas digitales y así también proteger la formación de capital humano durante este periodo de distanciamiento social. Entonces, el índice creo que es una excelente guía. En Colombia también pues, el índice lo formula un comité de expertos. Tenemos una institucionalidad y una gobernanza que garantiza la independencia del cálculo del índice, y luego las entidades y los ministerios ejecutores usan ese resultado para formular política que ahora articulamos en la Mesa de Equidad. Entonces, una gran herramienta que en Colombia tenemos plenamente incorporada en nuestra formulación y seguimiento de políticas públicas, y también, por supuesto, en las metas de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y en la Agenda 2030, que también están absolutamente compenetrados con el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo. Muchas gracias, Sabina.
Muchísimas gracias, Daniel. Aprendimos mucho de su ponencia. The Table of Equity Daniel spoke about is a unique component of Colombia's fight against both monetary and multidimensional poverty and inequality since 2011. And what was interesting was how, when poverty rose more in monetary terms than in multidimensional, more in urban than in rural, the table still became a place where the MPI and initiatives across ministries could be coordinated both during the emergency period and now in the period of recuperation. We look forward to continuing to learn from Colombia and this well-developed, well-institutionalized ways of using the MPI as a tool of management. Many speakers have drawn attention to the plight of children, and now we are delighted to welcome Sanjay Vijayasakara, Director of Programs at UNICEF, to deepen this theme. You have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this event. For well over a decade now, UNICEF has been working with governments to establish multidimensional child poverty measures. To date, over 100 national child poverty studies have been launched. We're delighted to be on this panel with our crucial partners, including the many governments here today. Children suffer poverty differently from adults. Their needs are different. Child poverty is a denial of their fundamental rights to education, health, nutrition, water and sanitation, protection, and shelter, diminishing their life chances and ability to realize their potential. The Global Multidimensional Poverty Index underlines the challenge, showing that children are twice as likely to live in multidimensionally poor households as adults, and 1/3 of those living in multidimensional poverty are children under 5. With COVID-19, the challenges for children are growing, with UNICEF and Save the Children estimating that 150 million additional children have fallen into multidimensional poverty due to the crisis. The SDGs have provided a global agreement to end child poverty. Yet, analysis done by the Global Coalition to End Child Poverty shows that in 2019, only 9 out of 46 countries reported on how many children are living in multidimensional poverty in their voluntary national reviews. And only 19 countries outlined the policies and programs in place to end child poverty by 2030. To mitigate the devastating impacts of COVID-19 crisis on children and to achieve the SDGs on ending child poverty, there are many examples of governments taking tangible steps, as many of the governments on this panel have outlined. For example, in Cambodia, the royal government took to scale its social protection program, a COVID-19 cash transfer program for poor households, which aims to reach over 500,000 households living in poverty. In Guatemala, the government, with the design and implementation of Bono Familia, an unconditional emergency cash transfer program, which reached more than 2 million poor and vulnerable families across the country, resulting in the largest social protection program in the country's history. In Thailand, from the onset of the pandemic, with ILO, IOM, UN Women, and other partners, we advocated for an expansion of the existing child support grant, disability grant, and old age allowance for vulnerable communities across the country severely impacted by COVID-19. And in mid-June, the Royal Thai government approved a new range of social protection measures to further protect the most vulnerable families against the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19. So we encourage all governments to take 3 actions. Firstly, to prioritize children in national development. Governments should take measures to avoid budget cuts and austerity measures which hurt children disproportionately, pushing them even more into poverty. Secondly, equitable and efficient investments in the social sectors are needed. And thirdly, to expand child-sensitive social protection programs. In conclusion, we would like to highlight our appreciation of governments who are leading the way in measuring and responding to child poverty in all its dimensions. We look forward to continued collaborations to achieve the SDG Goal 1 target of ending child poverty by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for a very rich and textured presentation, and also for speaking to our audience and calling on their agency and compassion for children in their own situations professionally and geographically. We indeed look forward to that collaboration you discussed to achieving the goal of ending child poverty. Thus far, we have heard from the public sector and international agencies, but a vital and leading energy in the world of poverty reduction is also the private sector. So we end with a speaker that bridges ideas, metrics, and commitments between multidimensional poverty reduction and the private sector. I invite Jamie Coates, the president of Sophia Oxford, to introduce this theme.
Excellencies, thank you. Thank you, Sabina, and thank you, John Hammock. So I'm Jamie Coates of Sophia Oxford. Poverty reduction is not just at a crossroads, but as a consequence of the pandemic, at a hole in the road that governments alone cannot fill. This high-level event is a call for committed and effective leadership to bring poverty to the fore, and for us to join efforts to wisely respond in partnership to those who are left behind. But how? This call for leadership must go beyond governments and include private sector leaders by asking them to look inside their own companies. Oxford University, which as we know is helping produce a vaccine for COVID, has also created Sophia Oxford, its first social enterprise, to bring the Al-Kaya Foster methodology that is behind the global and national MPIs to the private sector. All the work that Sabina has led, we want to make this available to the private sector. The private sector is being vocal that it wants to help. The private sector loves good data to better target limited resources for measurable impact. This is what multidimensional poverty indices do. We need the private sector to join you governments on the same multidimensional poverty page. For this reason, we are launching a trial in Latin America in the next few months to equip businesses to measure and analyze the challenges and deprivations affecting their employees and their families, and to inform their programs and strategies to increase their well-being. In order to fill that hole in the road and get on an even better track to deliver the SDGs, public-private partnerships are essential. Getting businesses using the MPI, the business MPI, is a powerful way to wisely align efforts and channel the increasing calls for transformed business models to achieve a sustainable and inclusive development. Sophia Oxford asks you to encourage your country's businesses to join in using the MPI tool and to make sure we all build forward better in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that call and for that invitation to a new set of actors with new energies and skills. Friends, we have been enriched in the last 2 hours to experience the determination, passion, and strategic skills of so many speakers. The object of their attention and exertion is not personal lucre, nor reaping low-hanging fruit. Rather, they are using their cunning and creativity to reduce the disadvantages that blight many lives. This event will close, but we hope that their words, their insights, their authenticity, and steely courage will ring in your memory and mine long after this day. Please let us all consider ourselves invited to join in the time-sensitive, precarious work of recognizing that we stand at a crossroad in terms of poverty. We need, with imperfect but decisive action, to create this inflection point Dr. Nishtar spoke of, to turn the corner together, and we can. All of the videos of this event will be online, and a summary will appear on the mppn.org website. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for the work that you do on these issues, however great or small you think it is part of the response. With thanks to the speakers, to the co-hosts of Chile, Pakistan, and UNDP, to my own team, and to UNDP Bhutan who provided this space, and most of all to you, our listeners, I declare this event closed.